For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe.
Another baseless principle often used to support pseudo-archaeology is appeal to pareidolia. Pareidolia, as you may know, is the human tendency to see recognizable images in accidental arrangements. Pareidolia is real, and this is universally accepted. We all have this urge to find something meaningful in our environment, even if it isn't meaningful. For example, seeing animals in the clouds. But some people use it as an argument to support pseudo-archaeological claims. In other words, if something they are looking at looks like a familiar object, it most likely is that object. Now, there are very basic forms of appeal to pareidolia that do not even bother to sound science-y. The most extreme examples are when people look at Egyptian glyphs or art and see modern objects, or when they see geological formations and assume them to be made by humans. But appeal to pareidolia is not science, and of course it is a poor argument because it doesn't rely on any hard facts, just on our imagination. But there are forms of pareidolia that are dressed up to look more like a hard science, and that leads us to mathematical coincidences and sacred geometry. To be clear, sacred geometry exists. It originally referred to geometric forms with esoteric significance being incorporated into the design of European churches and cathedrals. We know this happened because we have the records to demonstrate it. The builders borrowed symbols from a secret society known as the Pythagorean Brotherhood, and they put the symbols into the designs. Some people have then taken this idea and applied it to ancient sites too. But without a record of this or clear and obvious symbols, how can you know for sure? Well, they approach it like a treasure hunt. They look for symbols and patterns, and they play around with math. The more complex the math, the more it looks like science. But this isn't really about math. The math doesn't lead them deductively to conclusions. It's about looking for patterns, and this is completely subjective, which means it relies on our internal biases, such as observer expectancy bias and confirmation bias, which means the people performing the analysis will find what they are already hoping to find. The use of math makes it look like something scientific and objective, but this is nothing more than pareidolia with numbers. If someone is trying to find a hidden message in an ancient object, you can rest assured they will find something. It doesn't mean it was put there by the maker, though.
The fifth coincidence is in Easter Island, related to the Giza Plateau and many other enigmatic sites from the past on the Great Circle, where once again, because of the value given to a meter, the distance between Easter Island and Giza is 10,000 times the golden ratio in kilometers. 100 times pi in meters, 10 times pi in meters, 10,000 times the golden ratio in kilometers. If the size of the Earth were divided by any other number than 40 million, none of this would have ever existed.
I checked, and the distance from the center of Easter Island to the center of the Great Pyramid is 16,161.5 kilometers. That is only 9,988 times the golden ratio. Somebody's not being very precise.
So what, some people may still ask. To determine the meter, you have to have measured Earth. Who was capable of doing that so long ago? Put all these coincidences together and you get the most enigmatic tomb ever built on the planet.
This BAM video provides an important object lesson. It demonstrates quite clearly how easy it is to dive into an undigested mass of data and emerge with a pattern, which at first glance is so intricately woven together that it's hard to believe it is nothing more than the product of someone's imagination. But when you examine more closely, you find a certain amount of fudging. Instead of letting the data speak for themselves, they mold the facts, consciously or unconsciously, into forms that will support their dogmas. Sir Flinders Petrie once reported that he caught a pyramidologist filing down a stone to make its size conform to one of his theories. Don't be that guy.
143,200th part of the daily rotation, a point on the equator will travel a distance precisely equal to the perimeter of the Great Pyramid's base as measured with the socle. In 1/2 second of time, a point on the equator will rotate a distance equal to one side of the base of the Great Pyramid measured with the socle. Now, that we know of, nobody 4,200 years ago did, or how they would have done it, we don't know. But on the other hand, if it turns out that the pyramid could be much older, it leads us back to the, going back 10,000 or 20,000 years. This to me is one of those little, sort of like the little crack in the dike, that if you don't keep it plugged, the whole edifice of contemporary knowledge could get swept away. Because we can't acknowledge that somebody 10,000 or 20,000 years ago was scientifically sophisticated. That was the days of Cro-Magnon man and Alley-oop living in the cave and so forth. Cavemen, which is a silly idea actually. Yes, I'm sure people did take refuge in caves when things got really crazy out here. Yes, I think people did take refuge in caves.
So here we get to the reason why Carlson has led us all on this numbers trek, to try to demonstrate that there was a lost advanced civilization. It's interesting because this form of argumentation is illustrative of the kinds of arguments we get from people with no expertise in the areas that they're talking about. They don't dig up new artifacts or ruins to show this civilization. In fact, as I discussed in my other video, Carlson says there probably aren't much of any to be found. They don't point to inscriptions written by people who visited this civilization. They don't point to scientific evidence for the existence of this civilization. Instead, they will point to artifacts or ruins from known civilizations and claim that these artifacts actually belong to the lost civilization on the grounds that the known civilization was incapable of building it. And this is exactly what Carlson is doing here. The measurements of the Earth, he argues, are encoded in the Great Pyramid, and therefore the Egyptians couldn't have made it because they didn't know the measurements of the Earth. Never mind the fact that an argument that a known society couldn't have achieved something is not the same as an argument that another society existed. He didn't establish that the measurements of the Earth are encoded in the pyramid at all, because he used faulty measurements, massaged the data to make a match more likely, and to achieve an end result, all the while appealing to the principle of a pseudo-science called sacred geometry, which is based on an ancient Greek religion called Pythagoreanism.
But see, this is one of those things, again, that if you accept that it's not just a coincidence, it opens up a whole can of worms that mainstream science generally doesn't want to address.
If he was using actual science, then maybe they would address it. Note that he says, if you accept that it's not just a coincidence. This is an appeal to faith. He is asking you, the listener, to believe that it's not just a coincidence. And if you believe, then this opens a whole can of worms. Or to use another expression, you will be venturing down the rabbit hole that people like Carlson and others have created for you. Sadly, some unsuspecting people have gone down this rabbit hole and now are stuck in this alternate reality, all because they fell for magic tricks like the one Carlson has performed here.
Perhaps it goes without saying, but we've left the very concept of achieving this via handwork with primitive tools far, far behind. The precision of relative geometry is one thing, but the sheer level of mathematical interrelation between the base circle sections comprising components of the vase and the expression of pi and the golden ratio in the object could only have been achieved by a very sophisticated mechanism guiding whatever was actually cutting the stone.
Ben and his friends do not seem to be aware that pi and the golden ratio show up on many objects, including natural ones, without their ever having been devised by the makers. This is because pi and the golden ratio are discoveries, not inventions. This is one of the problems I saw with Mark's analysis and did not see with Marion's. Mark tends to impose his own understanding of mathematical principles onto the object and then interprets that as an intentional part of the design. He speaks of concepts like the golden ratio being encoded into the object. In defense of this, he writes, "It might be possible by extreme luck to have an object randomly show the value of pi or phi somewhere. But remember that all systems in this object are tightly interrelated. Changing one parameter would throw everything else off." Yes, of course it would. But this is an assumption that the way it is the way it is supposed to be. Or to put it better, the way he found it is the way it is supposed to be. The fact is, Pi exists in every circle. If you draw a circle, pi will be there. And the golden ratio also can be created unintentionally, and I mean unintentionally by the interpreter as well as by the maker. Math is objective, but interpretation of math is subjective, and it has been misused so many times. And imposing one's own chosen system over an object is a subjective choice. For more on this issue, see my video called Great Pyramid Number Magic. Please note Mark's superimposition of the seed of life grid over the vase. I immediately recognized this as a New Age symbol and one commonly associated with what is called sacred geometry. So on Twitter, when someone asked me about the article, I wrote, "Whenever you see the flower of life grid, know that you have ventured into the world of New Age spirituality." I should have said seed of life grid. Well, Mark took offense to this statement and said I was using a guilt by association argument. Yes, my comment was provocative, but I wasn't making a statement about him as a person. I was making a statement about what he did. I tried to explain to him, you are arbitrarily imposing a symbol onto an artifact and ascribing meaning to it. Just because you can find correlations or see interesting mathematical patterns and relationships, this does not prove intention. But he would not hear of it, and he called me a complete fraud.
I also want to briefly mention the concept of what's called sacred geometry by many who are familiar with it, as shown in the artifact, with the repeated flower of life grids or the appearance of pi and phi. This category is not some crystal hippie woo, as I've seen some disreputable skeptics of this work try to frame it, but is rather exactly as described. Within the bounds of so-called sacred geometry lie the secrets of the universe, the interrelation of objects from the workings of atoms and molecules to the ratios expressed by DNA and life itself, to the motions of planets, star systems, and galaxies. It is the very stuff of our existence, and to dismiss these findings by trying to brand it some sort of esoteric nonsense is, simply put, intellectual weakness.
I hope the irony is not lost on you that here Ben defends sacred geometry in his video about Mark Fist's research, after Mark took offense at me suggesting he was using sacred geometry. Let me be clear here. The study of sacred geometry, that is, other cultures' beliefs about the symbolism and sacred meanings of geometric shapes and proportions, is a worthy undertaking. But to subscribe to such beliefs yourself is not science. The secrets of the universe do not lie within the bounds of sacred geometry, and such a belief is exactly the kind of hippie woo and esoteric nonsense that Ben claims it is not.